Here you go, Grandpa. Try not to hurt yourself." The laughter that followed was the laughter of young men who have not yet been humbled by anything. Loose, easy, the sound of people who mistake the absence of failure for the presence of competence. Gunnery Sergeant Travis Cole, 28 years old, USMC Scout Sniper Instructor, built with the deliberate musculature of a man who treats his body as professional equipment, held the rifle out with one hand, casually, the way you hand a tool to someone you expect to use it incorrectly. The weapon was a Chetak M200 Intervention. Chambered in. .408, precision-tuned. The kind of rifle that costs more than most people's first car and that in the wrong hands is nothing more than a very expensive mistake. He was offering it to the old man the way a man offers a puzzle to a child, as entertainment, not as a genuine transfer of capability. The old man's name was Harold Chester Boone. He was 79 years old. He stood at the firing line of the Marine Corps' Mountain Warfare Training Center's long-range precision range at Bridgeport, California, elevation 6,800 feet, air thin and cold and honest in the way that high-altitude air is always honest, stripping away everything the lower world allows you to hide behind. He wore a faded canvas field jacket the color of old pine needles, dark trousers, and leather boots that had been worn to the shape of his feet over so many years of use that they had become less like footwear and more like a second skin. His white hair was cut close against his skull, and his face was weathered to a depth that you do not achieve in a gym or a classroom. The weathering of a man who has spent years outdoors in conditions that were not designed with his comfort in mind. His hands, when he took the rifle from Cole, were the first thing that gave anyone pause, though most of them wouldn't understand why until later. Large hands. Still as groundwater. The knuckles thickened by decades, the fingers slightly misaligned in a way that spoke of old fractures poorly set in places far from surgical care. The skin across the back of them crisscrossed by a fine network of old scars that caught the light like a topographic map of somewhere difficult. He took the rifle with both hands and settled it against his body in one motion, and the motion was wrong in the way that very right things sometimes look wrong to people who have only learned one way to be right. "Wind's coming from the northeast," Harold said. He was looking downrange, not at the weapon, not at Cole. "Changes direction about 2/3 of the way out. Does that every afternoon up here." Cole looked at Sergeant First Class Donovan Reyes, who was standing to his right with a spotting scope slung over one shoulder and an expression of patient amusement on his face. They shared the look of two men at a comedy show who have already guessed the punchline. Behind them, 11 junior Marines, Scout Sniper candidates. 6 weeks into the most demanding marksmanship course the Corps offered, stood in a loose cluster with the studied casualness of young men performing not caring while caring enormously about what was about to happen. "Wind reading's what the Kestrel is for," Cole said, tapping the anemometer attached to his vest. "Digital, accurate to 1/10 of a meter per second. No guessing required." Harold turned his head and looked at the Kestrel unit with the same expression a man might give to a parking meter, acknowledging it exists without being particularly impressed by it. "That'll tell you the wind at this end," he said. "Doesn't tell you the wind at the other end, or the 3 winds in between." He looked back downrange. That valley carries 3 separate airflows after 1,400 hours. The draw on the left pulls one direction, the ridge on the right deflects another, and the thermal off the dark rock at the base of the north face runs perpendicular to both. You want to hit something at 3,000 meters in this valley after noon, you need to read all 3. The Kestrel gives you 1. Cole put a hand over his mouth, briefly, and turned it into adjusting his jaw. "Right," he said. "Well, the target's at 3,000 meters, 10-inch plate, center of the stand. When you're ready." The recruits heard this. A few of them glanced at each other. Lance Corporal Tegan Marsh, the youngest of them at 19, did the math without meaning to. 3,000 meters was just under 2 miles. The world record for a confirmed sniper kill at the time she'd entered training was just over 3,500. A 10-inch plate. At 3,000 meters. With a rifle you'd been handed 30 seconds ago by a man who was more interested in making a joke than providing a zero. She looked at the old man. He was lying down. He had gone prone without ceremony, settling behind the rifle with the unhurried precision of a man taking up a position he has taken up 10,000 times, and the settling was absolute. Not the tense, deliberate posture of a student or a show-off, but the complete, boneless stillness of a person who has made himself part of the terrain. His left elbow found its position. His right hand settled on the grip. His cheek came down to the stock. And then nothing moved. He was not adjusting. He was not checking his position. He had arrived. And he was still. Cole watched this with the first faint loosening of his certainty. "There's a bipod on that," he said. "I know," Harold said, from the ground. Cole waited for him to deploy it. Harold did not deploy it. Reyes lowered his spotting scope slightly and looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. Neither said anything. The range was a long, narrow corridor carved by geography into the eastern face of the Sierra Nevada, a 2-mile channel of mountain air between granite ridgelines that absorbed sound and returned it strangely, so that voices carried in unexpected directions and distances. The wind moved through it the way water moves through a canyon, not in one stream, but in braided currents, crossing and recrossing. The afternoon sun had moved behind the western ridgeline an hour ago, and the range was in the particular cold shadow of high alpine late afternoon. The air sharp with the smell of pine resin and thin soil, and the distant clean cold of snowpack. The target stands were visible downrange as thin black verticals against the pale granite background, diminishing with distance until the 3,000-meter stand was barely a thread. Harold was looking at a leaf. Not metaphorically. There was a single aspen leaf on the ground, 8 inches in front of the muzzle, fallen from somewhere up the ridgeline, and Harold was watching the way it moved. It trembled once, slightly, then lay still. Then it trembled again, in a slightly different direction, and held that for 4 seconds before returning to stillness. His eyes had the quality of attention that belongs to people who have learned to read the world through details that others don't register as information. "He's looking at a leaf," one of the recruits said, in a low voice, half amused and half something else. "Quiet on the line," Reyes said, automatically, and then seemed mildly surprised he'd said it. Harold made one small adjustment to his position. Not the rifle, not his hands, his left boot, moving it perhaps a centimeter to the right, redistributing something in his body architecture that was invisible to everyone watching, but that changed, in some foundational way, the quality of his relationship with the ground beneath him. Then he was still again. Cole checked his watch. 22 seconds since the old man had gone prone. Harold exhaled once, slowly, completely, the exhalation of a man emptying himself of everything that does not serve the next 3 seconds. The leaf in front of the muzzle moved northeast for a count of 2 and lay still. The rifle fired. The report was a flat, enormous crack that went up the granite walls on both sides and came back altered. You heard the shot, and then you heard its ghost. And then silence pressed back in from all sides, with the particular completeness that follows a very loud noise in a confined space. Downrange. Something happened at approximately 1.8 seconds after the trigger broke, the distance required for the round to cover 3,000 meters at its muzzle velocity, carrying its trajectory through whatever the valley's layered air had to say about it. At the 3,000-meter stand, the target left the stand. Not a hit that wobbled it. Not a graze that sent it spinning. The 10-inch steel plate separated from the stand cleanly and fell straight down and did not reappear, because the round had found the center of it with enough authority that the question of center had been settled completely. Tegan Marsh forgot that she was supposed to be performing, not caring. "Did that?" she started. "Hit," said Reyes, and his voice had gone strange in a way he was not trying to hide, because he had been shooting at that level for 6 years and he was looking through a spotting scope that did not leave room for interpretation. And what he had just seen through it was something he would describe to people for the rest of his career. He lowered the scope. He looked at the old man on the ground. He looked at Cole. Cole was standing at the firing line with his hands at his sides and the expression of a man who has been very certain about something for a long time and has just been handed significant evidence that the certainty required review. Harold Boone rolled clear of the rifle with the same economy with which he had taken up the position, rose to his feet in a single, unhurried motion, and set the Chaytak down on the shooting bench with the careful deliberateness of a man returning something that belongs to someone else. He dusted off the front of his field jacket. He looked downrange one more time, briefly at the stand with nothing on it. 3 wins, he said, not 1. Then Corporal Diana Voss, who had been the spotter for the morning's training session and who had, in that capacity, been closer to Harold than anyone else on the range, said something that changed the nature of the afternoon. She said, "What's that on your jacket?" She was looking at the inside left panel of the canvas field jacket, which Harold's movement in rising had caused to swing briefly open. There, sewn to the lining with the kind of careful stitching that takes time and intention, was a patch, dark blue, worn with age, perhaps 4 inches across, depicting an eagle above an anchor with a trident and a pistol. Not a pin this time. A patch, stitched in, the way something is attached when it is not for display but for keeping. Cole had seen that insignia before. Everyone on the range had seen it before. Nobody smirked. Voss looked at Cole. Cole looked at the patch, and then at the old man, and then back at the patch, and something was happening in his face. A recalculation, visible and genuine, the expression of a man whose architecture of certainty is being rapidly revised. He said, "Sir, is that a seal, Voss?" said a voice from behind them. It came from Sergeant Major William Tarrant, the range safety officer, who had been at the scoring table at the range's eastern edge and who had, apparently, been watching the entire sequence from there. He was 51 years old, 28 years in the Corps, the kind of man whose presence on a range communicates without language that the range is his. He was walking toward them with a stride that had purpose without urgency, his cover straight, his expression the composed flatness of someone who has decided what is happening and what needs to happen next. He reached the firing line. He looked at Cole. He looked at the patch on Harold's jacket. His jaw tightened once, briefly. "I need everyone off the firing line except Boone," he said. "Candidates, benches, Cole, Reyes, with me." Now, Cole started to say something. Now, "Gunnery Sergeant." They moved. At the eastern scoring table, out of Harold's earshot, Sergeant Major Tarrant made a phone call. He turned slightly away from Cole and Reyes as he dialed, which told them both that whatever he was dialing, it was above their pay grade. They heard him say a name. Just the name. First and last. Quietly. And then heard his voice do something neither of them had heard it do in their combined 12 years of knowing him. It went careful. The particular careful of a man who is choosing every word because the person on the other end of the line requires them to be chosen. He was on the call for 90 seconds. When he ended it, he stood with the phone in his hand for a moment before putting it away. Then he turned to Cole and Reyes and said, "What you are about to hear, you will tell every Marine you know. Understood?" Cole said, "Sergeant Major, that is not a question. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant Major." Tarrant looked at the range, at the firing line, at the old man in the faded field jacket standing beside the shooting bench, hands in his pockets, looking downrange at something 2 miles away that was no longer there. Colonel Hennessy is en route from the base with General Park. ETA 14 minutes. You will have this range squared away and at attention when they arrive. He looked at Cole with an expression that was not unkind, but was very direct. And Gunnery Sergeant, whatever you said to that man when you handed him the rifle, I strongly suggest you spend the next 14 minutes thinking about how to undo it. Cole didn't ask how Tarrant knew what he'd said. Yes, Sergeant Major, he said. The vehicles arrived in 13 minutes, a military staff car and a black Suburban with base plates, both moving without the observance of range road speed limits, gravel speaking under tires as they stopped at the range entrance. Colonel Patricia Hennessy came out of the staff car first, service dress. The kind of posture you develop over 25 years that makes everything else about you legible before you've said a word. Behind her, Brigadier General James Park, 1-star, MARSOC commanding general, came out of the Suburban and moved with the economy of motion of a man who has never once in his professional life been in a hurry because he has never needed to be. Behind him, 2 more officers whose ranks the candidates couldn't immediately read at distance. The general crossed the range without looking at anyone except Harold Boone. He stopped 4 feet from him. He looked at him the way men look at people they last saw in circumstances that neither of them has entirely put down. His face held something that was not sentiment, something more compressed and more durable than sentiment. The feeling you carry when you understand the full weight of what a person has survived and what they did before surviving it. General James Park, Brigadier General, United States Marine Corps, MARSOC, came to attention. The salute he rendered was not a performance. It was the gesture in its original and complete form. A recognition of something that cannot be ranked, given by a man who has more rank than almost everyone on that range to a man who holds none, because rank was not what was being saluted. The salute was for the thing that rank exists to point toward and almost never reaches. He held it. Harold Boone returned it. Slow, absolute, the candidates were at the benches and they did not move. Tegan Marsh would later say she felt the salute before she processed it, felt it in the way you feel the moment before lightning, a charge in the air that changes the quality of everything. General Park dropped his salute. He said, Harold. Jimmy, Harold said. A pause that had the texture of shared history. You didn't need to come all the way out. I know I didn't, the general said. I wanted to. He looked past Harold briefly at the empty stand at 3,000 meters, the thread of dark metal with nothing on it. His expression moved. Still doing that. Wind was clean today, Harold said. Mostly, General Park turned to the range. Colonel Hennessy stepped forward with a document, 2 pages, printed in the last 15 minutes from a file that existed in a classified database that required specific access to open. The general took it without looking at it, because he already knew what it said. He had read it first 12 years ago, and again 6 years after that, and could reconstruct it from memory. He held it because the reading of it aloud was the point, not the knowing. Chief Petty Officer Harold Chester Boone, he began, and his voice carried across the range with the clean precision of a man who understands that some things need to be said in the open air, in front of people who will carry them. United States Navy. Enlisted 1963. Basic Underwater Demolition and SEAL Training. Class 12. Assigned SEAL Team 2, 1965. Deployed Republic of Vietnam, Laos, and operations I am not at liberty to name by theater, 1965 through 1972. The wind moved through the range. Nobody shifted. In the course of his service, Chief Petty Officer Boone established what was, at the time of his separation, the longest confirmed precision engagement in naval special warfare history, an engagement conducted in the Quang Binh province of North Vietnam in 1969, at a distance of 2,286 meters, with a rifle that had been field-modified using components sourced from equipment he was not supposed to have, in conditions that the after-action report described as, he glanced at the document, though he did not need to, beyond the theoretical effective range of any weapon then in the American inventory. Cole stood very still. The round was fired across a valley with 4 distinct wind layers. No digital instrumentation, no spotter for the final calculation. His spotter had been wounded 30 minutes prior and evacuated. He made the shot alone. The general let that land. It saved the lives of 11 members of a combined SEAL and MACSOG element who were pinned at an extraction point, because the man he put down was the enemy's forward fire controller, and without him the coordinated mortar fire stopped. All 11 made it to the helicopter. Marcia's hands had gone flat against her thighs. His total confirmed engagements remain classified. What is not classified is this. The general looked up from the document. Awards and decorations. Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars with Combat Distinguishing Device, 3 Purple Hearts, Presidential Unit Citation, the Cross of Gallantry with Gold Star, Republic of Vietnam. He paused. And the Medal of Honor, awarded 1970, for actions in Tha Thinh province, in which Chief Petty Officer Boone, operating alone after his team was compromised, maintained an overwatch position for 6 hours through the night, making 11 separate engagements at distances ranging from 400 to 1,800 meters, allowing a Marine company that did not know he was there to consolidate their position and call in a successful extraction at first light. He put the document down. The Marines in that company had no idea anyone was watching over them that night. They found out a year later. One of them is currently the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. He folded the document and handed it back to Hennessy. "The enemy," he said, and his voice took on the quiet precision of a man landing the sentence he has been building toward, called him Thinh Khiet Im Lung. He let the words carry. The silent death god. Because they would hear nothing. No warning. No spotter. No second shot. And then something would end. He looked at Cole. The rifle your gunnery sergeant handed him this morning as a joke was his service weapon. The Chetak. The same caliber, different model, but the same conversation. He had that conversation for 22 years. The consequences were handled correctly and quickly. Gunnery Sergeant Cole received a formal counseling letter and was reassigned from instruction to evaluation pending a 3-month conduct review. It was not the end of his career. It was the adjustment of it, toward something that would ultimately make him better, if he let it. General Park, who understood the difference between correction and destruction, made sure the review was fair. Then Harold Boone walked to Cole. Across the firing line, unhurried, hands in the pockets of the canvas field jacket, the patch on its lining moving slightly with his stride. He stopped in front of the gunnery sergeant, 28 years old, physically magnificent, technically accomplished, still becoming what he would eventually be, and he looked at him with those large, still eyes. He put a hand on Cole's shoulder. The gesture had no triumph in it. It had the weight of someone who has watched enough people make this specific mistake to know exactly what it cost them, and who does not enjoy the collection of that cost. "The gear's better now than anything we had," he said, quietly. "The Kestrel, the ballistic computers, the data, all of it. Use it. It's real." A pause, but don't let it tell you more than it knows. The wind beyond what your instruments reach is still just wind. It doesn't care what you paid for the tool. You have to read it yourself. With what you have here, He released Cole's shoulder and touched 2 fingers briefly to his own temple, and here. The hand moved to his chest, briefly, and was still. No instrument was built that can replace that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He looked at Cole for a moment longer. Then he walked to the shooting bench and picked up his range bag and thanked Sergeant Major Tarrant, who shook his hand in both of his. He walked to the range exit. At the benches, the 11 candidates were still and quiet in the way that people are still and quiet when they have just received, without asking for it, something that will reorganize the way they understand their profession. Tegan Marsh was watching him go. She was thinking about the leaf. The way he had read it. The way the round had crossed 2 miles of braided mountain air and found what he had sent it to find. Because he had understood what the instruments could not tell him, and because he had been doing that kind of understanding for longer than she had been alive. She thought about it for the rest of her career.
7 weeks later, at a Veterans of Foreign Wars hall in Reno, Nevada, wood-paneled walls, a bar with the specific smell of decades of good nights, framed photographs covering every surface, the low hum of a television in the far corner showing a game that nobody was watching. Gunnery Sergeant Travis Cole walked in wearing civilian clothes and found Harold Boone sitting at the bar nursing a coffee, reading a week-old newspaper with the unhurried patience of a man who is not waiting for anything. Cole had driven 4 hours. He had practiced the words in his car for most of it, and they had not improved with the practicing. He sat down 2 stools away and then moved to the one next to Harold because the distance felt wrong. "Mr. Boone," he said. Harold looked up. If he was surprised, it didn't show. It didn't show because it was not surprise. He had seen Cole's truck in the parking lot and had considered that this might be what was happening, and had decided he was willing for it to be. "Son," he said. "I came to apologize," Cole said, "for what I said when I handed you the rifle. It was—" He stopped. "There's no version of it that was right. I'm sorry." Harold looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup and held it toward the bartender, who came down the bar and filled it and, without being asked, put a second cup in front of Cole. "You're a good shot," Harold said. Cole blinked. "I watched your candidates on the 500 and 800-meter lanes before you brought me to the long range," Harold said. "You taught them well. Their positions are clean. Their trigger discipline is good." He wrapped his large, scarred hands around the cup. "You're arrogant. That'll cost you more before it stops costing you. But you're a good teacher, and that's harder to build than arrogance is to knock off." He looked at Cole from the side. "You going to let it knock off?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'm going to try." Harold nodded once. He looked at the newspaper. Then he pushed it slightly to the side, opening the bar between them, and said, "Tell me about your candidates. The young woman in the 3rd lane. She was reading the wind before she got the Kestrel reading. Noticed that." Cole thought about Marsh. He smiled, involuntarily, the smile of an instructor who has a student doing something right. "She's the best I've had in 3 cycles," he said. "Tell me about her," Harold said. And they talked. The way people talk when the thing between them has been properly named and set aside. About wind and distance and the young people learning to do something very difficult in service of something worth doing. Outside, the Nevada night was cold and clear and enormous, and the stars above Reno were the same stars that had been above the mountains and the jungles and the long ranges where old men had learned things that they were still, patiently and without fanfare, passing forward. There are men among us who have carried their excellence so quietly, for so long, that the world has forgotten how to see it. They will not remind you. They will not perform it. They will stand at the firing line in worn boots and a faded jacket, and they will read the wind, and they will show you, once, without comment, what is possible. And then they will hand the rifle back and walk away. The lesson is yours to keep. Most of the time, it's the best thing they have left to give. If you were moved by Harold's story of quiet mastery and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. Script generated using the Veterans Valor Master Script framework. Word count, 4,200 words.